What does it mean for the whole internet to transition to post-quantum cryptography? Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've heard all of these rumors about quantum computers. And maybe you have heard that quantum computers can trivially break public key cryptography and that is an issue. Fortunately, we have alternative algorithms called post-quantum cryptography, but these need to be deployed. And if you look at the state of research right now, we're looking at pieces of the puzzle, but nobody's looking at the bigger picture. What does this mean if we have to make this transition for the whole internet? And that is what my talk will be about. Asking the questions, what is it that we need to do in order to transition all of the internet? Do we need to redesign parts of it, or do we even need to throw stuff away?
Welcome to talk.cybercni.fr.
Bienvenue.
Welcome and bienvenue to Talk CyberCNI, your monthly cybersecurity speaker series, where we inform you about what you should know about cybersecurity and, most important, why you should care. Today we already have the 24th edition, and today I'm super happy to welcome Roland von Rijswijk-Deij from the University of Twente and NLnet Labs, who will tell us something about quantum proving the internet. And as you just heard, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you already know why this topic is of big importance, and I really love that part, especially of the trailer. So, as usual, we have a second screen, so we have the Slido, so I show it to you on the left side. Not surprisingly, the link today is cybercni-24. When you go on Slido, you can also just scan the barcode. Those of you who already used it know that in the Slido you have the possibility to ask questions, but even if you don't have immediate questions, you see the other questions that are currently asked, and you can upvote and download them to select which one we'll answer at the end. So it's a very good idea to join the Slido. I will, as usual, also put you the link, so the name of the link on the left side of the screen throughout Roland's talk. Okay, so that said, let me introduce Roland. So after 2 decades in the industry working on applied cryptography and network security, Roland is a professor of measurement-based internet security at the University of Twente since 2021. His research interests are in the application of global-scale internet measurements to support empirically based security analytics and improvements of internet protocols and the transition to the internet to post-quantum cryptography, and this is exactly what his talk will be about. And that said, Roland, I'm super happy welcoming you today, and I hand over the microphone to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to quickly go to my slides. And as you can see, I could not resist the temptation to have a nice opening slide, the post-quantum of solace. And I hope at the end of my talk, you'll be a little bit convinced that even though quantum computing is going to cause some problems for the internet, we also have a way forward, but it needs work. So I always pop up this slide, which is a kind of tricky in an online environment, right? Because you can't raise your hand, but actually all of you have heard of quantum computing. And because I am a dog person, I had to put up a picture of a dog, of course. What I also hope you have seen is that quantum computing really is a hype at the moment. And this means that it's in the news all the time. I don't know if you've ever seen the little hype cycle that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. This is something that technology company Gartner uses to explain technology trends to high-level executives in companies. And you can't read it, at least in the version I see on my screen here, I can't read what is on there, but trust me when I say that quantum computing is somewhere at the peak of what they call inflated expectations. So that means it's completely overhyped. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you have such a hype, this leads to pressure on companies, on researchers, etc., and this leads to mistakes. And maybe a poignant example of that is a researcher from the Netherlands who is actually very famous for discovering a particle that plays a role in quantum computing. And he had to retract a publication, which is a very painful process. And then only to be scooped by a Danish group. I'm sorry, this is all in Dutch, but you'll just have to trust me. This is what it says. Be scooped by a Danish group, and actually he was sanctioned by the university because he took shortcuts in publications. And this can happen to anybody, right? Because the pressure is huge to perform and to do something. There's lots of funding in quantum computing. Maybe some of you have seen this. Quantum supremacy, the term alone, I'll show you what that means in my head on the next slide. But this is a paper from Google. So most of the gazillion authors on here all work for Google. By the way, this is the paper with by far the most authors I have ever seen. So this is a publication in Nature from 2019. Where Google claims quantum supremacy. And quantum supremacy actually means that they claim to have built a quantum computer that can execute the task faster than a classical computer can perform the same task. But I think quantum supremacy is a little bit of a hype term, because in my mind, I immediately see Jason Bourne when somebody says supremacy. And one more, because I can't resist making jokes about this. This is a news article from 2018. Quantum computing is at the end of blockchain. Think about it for a little bit. Spoiler alert, yes, or at least I damn well hope so. But the problem is that this hype isn't very helpful. News sites are abuzz with quantum, and it may seem like quantum computing is actually just around the corner, right? It's a matter of months or maybe years, and then we have a quantum computer. You can also think that it's going to change the world, and that's actually true. It is going to change the world. It's actually already changing the world. But maybe some quick facts to keep in mind. Practical quantum computers, and I'll come back to this a little bit later on in the talk, require thousands of so-called logical qubits, and these consist in each of these consists out of tens of thousands of physical qubits. And Google's quantum supremacy machine had 53 physical qubits. So that's a long way away from anything practical. That doesn't mean it's not a great accomplishment, but it's a long way away from anything practical. And I'm not going to go into this, but there are lots of challenges in both physics, computing, error correction that we have to overcome before we can actually build a very powerful quantum computer. Now, the goal of my talk is actually to poke through this hype and to tell you why you should care about quantum computing and what we should be doing in the near future. And that has everything to do with the internet. And the reason we care about quantum computing is these two people, Love Grover on the left and Peter Shor on the right. And actually, they both developed algorithms that you can execute on a quantum computer. If you stop and think about it, it's really cool, right? Because these two people thought of algorithms for a quantum computer that didn't exist when they designed it, right? So this is on a level with what Alan Turing did, designing computing algorithms without having an actual computer. And Grover's algorithm actually improves random searches on black box functions. And it reduces the number of attempts from n to square root of n. And if you think about it, this has consequences for symmetric cryptography. Because if you want to break symmetric cryptography, if the algorithm is good, this essentially equates to a random search, right? You're doing a brute force attack. Because it's a square root reduction, it would reduce the strength of something like AES-128 to 64 bits of security. And that's bad, right? Because 64 bits of security is within the realm of what we can break. Fortunately, there is no immediate reason to panic. Even though symmetric crypto is used for all sorts of purposes, what you can simply do is double the key size. Because it's square root of n, so square root of the key size, if you move to AES-256, you still get 128-bit security, which is generally considered safe for the moment. And this also applies to hash algorithms. I'm not going to go into detail on that. So generally speaking, we are not that worried about Grover's algorithm. Unfortunately, we do worry about this guy. This is Peter Shor, and he designed an algorithm that reduces the effort of factoring integers and solving discrete logarithms to polynomial time. If you know a little bit about crypto, you know that both factoring integers and discrete logarithms are the cornerstone of most of the cryptographic algorithms that we use on the internet today. And this is really a big deal because a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could break all current public key crypto, and it can break RSA 2048 in a matter of hours. I'll show you that a little bit later on. And asymmetric crypto is used for many purposes: key negotiation and authentication for HTTPS, legally binding digital signatures, etc., etc. We use this all the time to build trust and authentication on the internet. Unfortunately, a sufficiently powerful quantum computer would cause major problems for all of the internet. And the way I explain this in normal user terms is that we go from this nice little padlock icon that everybody shows in their browser. I see it actually right now in my browser when talking to you. So this link is secured. To the open padlock with the little red bar running through it. This happens for all of the internet, right? This is not just one connection, but you can break everything on all of the internet. And unfortunately, the existence of this algorithm and the fact that people are working on quantum computers requires us to take action soon or in the future, depending on the use case. So when will Shor's algorithm be a problem? Well, what you see here is a table that I took from a report from the National Academy of Sciences in the US, where they try to estimate how many qubits are needed to break a certain key strength. And I highlighted two that are essentially the two most used algorithms, which is RSA 2048 and elliptic curve cryptography with a 256-bit key. And the takeaway from this slide is that it takes hours to break these. What is actually interesting is that ECC has the same cryptographic strength, but is easier to break even with Shor than RSA. And then I have some recent news. I can't see the whole slide, and it's kind of important that they see the top bit. This is an announcement from IBM, where they unveil a 433 qubit quantum computer. And I highlighted the publication date of this. This was announced a little under, no, exactly 2 weeks ago, November 9th. And then Bart Grinnell, who is a famous cryptographer from, I think, Leuven in Belgium, tweeted, "Largest quantum computer ever. Only about 10 million bits to add before the first public key can be broken." So why does he say that? So let's go back to this table that I showed you about when Shor will be a problem. This 433 qubit processor has 433 physical qubits. And then if you look at this table, and the boldface entries in the table are RSA 2048 and ECC 256, you see that we need about 9 million qubits. So that is a whole lot more. Okay, so should we be worried? Well, I still think we should be. Even though current technology is far away from what we need, we should be worried. And why we should be worried is time of use. Because whether we are safe depends on how long cryptographic data is actually used. And the rule of thumb here is that if there is short-term use, so transactional use, there is no need to worry and no need for immediate action. However, if there is long or longer term use, you need to start thinking about transitioning now. And I'll explain in a little bit why. And maybe this is good to think about what constitutes short-term use and what constitutes long-term use. So let's look at time of use examples. If we think about short-term use, these are things like authentication, short-lived digital signatures, for example, those that are used in website certificates, online authentication protocols such as OpenID Connect, which is what you use when you log in with your Google or Facebook ID into something, or you log in with your university credentials into another online service. SAML is a similar protocol. So essentially anything where the result of the cryptographic operation loses relevance quickly. Now, long-term use are maybe things that are obvious: encrypted long-term archives, legally binding digital signatures, and ephemeral key exchange, and essentially anything where the result of the cryptographic operation should be safe for decades. Because current thinking is that a practical quantum computer maybe is something like 15 to anywhere between 15 and 30 years away. Now, if you look carefully, I listed ephemeral key exchange under long-term use. And ephemeral actually means short-lived or vanishing. So why is this on the list for long-term use? Well, that's because of these two things. I hope you recognize Edward Snowden. I also hope you recognize the Great Seal of the National Security Agency of the USA. And when you think about long-term storage of data, this can also be long-term storage of data without consent. And security services are constantly connecting traffic. And if you think about a TLS connection, when that TLS connection is established, there is a key exchange, because the encryption itself on the channel uses a symmetric algorithm, but the key exchange is an asymmetric algorithm, an ephemeral key exchange, typically something Diffie-Hellman-like. And that means that if you can crack that key exchange, you can essentially access all of this stored data about communication that you recorded, and that may still be valuable years into the future. So this is something to care about. Now, fortunately, cryptographers are working very, very hard to address this problem, and they introduced something called post-quantum cryptography. And what they are doing is they're working on new public key algorithms that are what we call quantum safe. And that essentially means that they remain secure, even if a powerful quantum computer ever comes to be. And the process of developing these algorithms, and I'll show you a couple of examples later on in the talk, goes anywhere from ripe to green. So we actually have really mature cryptographic algorithms that are based on hashes. For example, hash-based signature schemes that have existed for decades. They were one of the first public key algorithms ever to exist that are actually resistant against attempts to break them with quantum computers. Unfortunately, all of the commonly used algorithms are vulnerable, so we need to replace those. One issue, and this will be the focus of the remainder of my talk. One issue is that these post-quantum algorithms are often radically different. For some algorithms, for example, every key can only be used once. This is the case for these hash-based signature algorithms, where every key you use for signing, you can only use it once. Some of them require more CPU power or more memory, or even both. And that can be a huge challenge. And some algorithms also have much larger keys or much larger signatures. And that is also a problem because you need to transmit these across the internet. So this can slow down communication or even break down communication at some point. Okay, this has consequences for applications, and somebody is showing me the questions. So I'm guessing this is a subtle hint that I should look at the questions and answer some of them. Let me look at them. What is the killer application for quantum computing? Okay, perfect, excellent. Okay, because I see them on my screen, I'm thinking, oh, somebody's sending me subtle hints. Excellent. Then I won't worry about them. The fact that these algorithms are radically different has consequences for applications. And I'm going to talk you through a specific example in a minute, and then try to generalize that. But first, I want to talk about developing these algorithms. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US is running a competition. Some of you may have heard of this. And the goal of this competition is to select secure quantum safe algorithms for different applications. Now, how did they do this? They essentially asked the cryptographic community, send us your best post-quantum algorithms. And they give some guidance on what these algorithms, the properties these algorithms should have. Then these are made public, and then other research groups are invited to try and break these algorithms. And that process has been going on for a number of years. And the first set of algorithms have actually been selected for standardization this summer. And most of those algorithms focus on key exchange mechanism. And that is because of the reasons I gave you, right? There's an urgency due to the long-term storage of encrypted communication. After the announcement this summer, the focus shifted a little bit, and now there is much more focus on digital signatures in the next iteration of the competition. What all of this means is that there may be a little bit of a rocky road ahead, because most of the research focus so far has been going into designing algorithms and trialing them on a fairly small scale. Post-quantum crypto has really only been tested in mainstream web applications. Actually, there was an announcement, I think late last week, that Google has now deployed post-quantum key exchange mechanisms on their internal communications, so within the company. Cloudflare, a little bit earlier this year, announced that they also turned on post-quantum algorithms for external communications. But that means your browser also has to support it when you connect to a website. Now, I hope I don't have to convince this audience that the internet is much more than just the web. And that leaves us with the $1 billion question, and actually it might take that much in research funding. How do we transition the entire internet to post-quantum cryptography? I'm going to give you a motivational example, and I'm going to use this example because I happen to be an expert on the domain name system, but I'll try to generalize this a little bit later on. So a motivational example is DNSSEC. So DNS, I hope you all know, is the basis for all communication over the internet. We use this to translate names into IP addresses and other things. And DNSSEC is actually a security extension to the DNS that adds authenticity and integrity. And it does this by adding additional resource records to the DNS for signatures called RSIG, and for public keys called DNS key. And signing of DNS is typically done offline, so the entire DNS zone is signed in one go, but it can also be online. For example, large content delivery networks do this because they use DNS for load balancing and local content cache selection. For example, Cloudflare does that. They do DNSSEC, but they do online signing. So what does it actually mean? So DNSSEC required a change in transport mechanisms because the original DNS specification allows a maximum message size of 512 bytes. And that is too small for DNSSEC because we now have to transport keys and signatures. And a protocol extension to the DNS called eDNS0 solves this. And essentially, you put an extra set of parameters in a DNS packet, and we use this to convey additional information and allow for larger DNS packets. Unfortunately, use of eDNS comes with a risk, and that risk is fragmentation, because eDNS0 allows for UDP payloads of almost 64 kilobytes, but this can lead to IP fragmentation if the message exceeds the MTU. And this was actually a huge problem in the early days of DNSSEC. So roughly until 2014, when implementers started to figure out how to circumvent this problem. At the base of this is the use of large RSA keys and multiple keys involved in signing of a zone. And I'm going to talk about two problems that fragmentations can actually cause in the next two slides. The first problem I want to talk about is unreachability. On the slide, you see 3 steps of a DNS resolution process, where on the left-hand side, you see a recursive caching resolver, and on the right-hand side, you see an authoritative name server. Now, in a DNSSEC request, you actually tell the authoritative server what the maximum size in terms of response is that you are willing to accept. So in this case, the resolver uses the default setting, which is 4 kilobytes, or used to be 4 kilobytes on most implementations. And then the authoritative name server sends back a response. Now, unfortunately, that response was so large that it had to be fragmented over 2 packets. And as you can see in red, there is a firewall between the resolver and the authoritative name server. And this firewall, like many firewalls, is configured to block fragments. So what happens is that the second part of the response packet never reaches the resolver, and the resolver keeps waiting until a timeout occurs, and then it tells the authoritative name server, I didn't receive all of the fragments. I couldn't receive your whole response. This was such a big problem in the early days that a paper in 2012 by one of my students actually showed that up to 10% of resolvers on the internet may struggle with fragmented UDP packets. As a consequence, all mainstream DNS resolver implementations have workarounds for this problem. And the RFC on eDNS 0 was actually changed to deal with this. So they changed the recommendation to have a default of 4 kilobytes to something more sensible. Unfortunately, it introduces another problem, and this is actually a threat, and this is fragment-based cache poisoning. This is an attack that was introduced in 2013 by 2 people called Hertzberg and Schulman. And what this does is it leverages fragmentation for cache poisoning. And that means that follow-up fragments do not contain any identification, unlike the first fragment, which contains the query ID and the source port. And what they then do is they put records that they want to poison in a second or later fragment. The irony of this is that DNSSEC's large responses, and DNSSEC was introduced specifically to deal with cache poisoning attacks, help facilitate this attack. But only on non-validating DNS resolver. So if your DNS resolver does not do DNSSEC validation, this attack can actually work. Why am I telling you all this? Because this has nothing to do with PostQuantum. Well, I'm telling you all this because this has had a huge impact on the DNS community. They want to avoid fragmentation at any cost. And they deploy 3 strategies to do this. The first strategy is that they strip some optional records from responses, which has some consequences for performance. The second strategy is that they, and this one is important, that they switch to different cryptographic algorithms, in this case, elliptic curve cryptography, because that has smaller keys and smaller signatures. And that they collaborated on a set of parameters that avoid fragmentation, DNS Flagday. So quickly, what they did, so this stripping of optional records, in a DNS response, essentially you have a number of sections in a response packet. And I highlighted 2 of these, the authority and additional section. And essentially these sections are optional in many responses. And stripping them reduces fragmentation significantly because it removes records, but also all of the signatures over those records. And this plot from a name server at the Dutch National Research Network shows you the impact of that. So before minimal responses was turned on, the average response size was somewhere between 800 and 1,000 bytes. And when this feature was turned on, this minimal responses, it dropped to below 200 bytes. This also has a performance impact, but unfortunately, that is not well understood. The other thing that operators started doing is switching to elliptic curve cryptography, and we actually did a lot of research on that. The original DNSSEC specifications assumed that you would use RSA. Actually, they only allowed you to use RSA. But in 2012, the use of elliptic curve cryptography was standardized for DNSSEC. This has some really nice effects because it allows you, and I hope you can see this in the plot, it allows you to vastly reduce the size of responses. Highlighted here in dark black on the right-hand side of the plot is if we use RSA for signing. And then further toward the left, you see the response size if we use elliptic curve algorithms, with the smallest response size with the dotted line all the way on the left if we use so-called Edwards curves. That's curve 25519 for those who are interested. What this means is that if we switch from using RSA to using elliptic curve crypto, and we use the most aggressive ECC algorithm, we can actually fit most DNS signed responses within the limit of the original DNS specification, 512 bytes. This has two side effects. It leads to much smaller packets, which means less fragmentation. It also vastly reduces the potential for amplification attacks with DNSSEC. So this is very attractive for operators. But ECC also comes with a challenge, and this is validation speed, because ECC signature verification is much slower than RSA. And verification occurs way more frequently than signing in DNSSEC. So what is the impact of this on operations? What you see in the table here is that, for example, ECDSA P384, so this is a relatively large key size, is up to an order of magnitude slower than RSA in terms of validation. So we modeled the impact of signature verification on DNSSEC operations, and our conclusion was that ECC use is actually feasible. And these two plots demonstrate that. The gray plane that you see in the plot is the maximum number of signature validations that you can do on a single core for a specific algorithm. On the left-hand side, you see this for the most conservative algorithm, which is P384. And then the red surface that you see is the number of signature validations that you would need to do given a certain amount of DNSSEC deployment on the internet and a certain query rate towards a resolver. And it takes way too much time to explain this in detail, but the takeaway from this is that we can safely deploy elliptic curve algorithms without exhausting the resources of DNS resolvers when they have to validate these signatures. And the link to PostQuantum here is that, like I said, many PostQuantum algorithms actually have CPU requirements that may be much higher than existing algorithms, such as ECC or RSA. So for ECC, we were able to prove that ECC is fast enough to be a viable candidate, but we don't know this yet about some of the PostQuantum algorithms. The final thing I want to talk about in this respect is DNS Flagday, because due to operational problems with fragmentation, DNS vendors decided to work together. And then in 2020, they had a flag day, and all major open source vendors and several major DNS operators, such as Google, changed their eDNS 0 settings in software and operational resolvers. And the result is that the maximum limit for UDP transport is now 1232 bytes. And why that is important, I'll get to in a minute. This also means that in all other cases, there will be a fallback to TCP. Okay, so what are the takeaways until now? DNSSEC increases the size of DNS messages, and this causes both availability and security problems, which the community has worked very hard to mitigate. This has shaped the mindset of this community, and as a consequence, a switch to quantum-safe algorithms has to take this mindset into account. You can't just go to the DNS community and tell them, look, people, unfortunately, the algorithms you use are no longer safe if there's a quantum computer. So now you have to use this new algorithm, which has huge signatures and huge keys, because that's not going to fly. So what does this mean for PQC and DNSSEC? I hope I convinced you that signature size, public key size, and verification speed are an issue. And that means that we have to take this into account. Unfortunately, because of the nature of many of these post-quantum algorithms, dealing with larger signatures or keys may be unavoidable. Similarly, the higher computational load for verification may also be an issue, and this is something that we really need to avoid because this has a huge operational impact. We need to try and balance any changes in favor of a lower workload for DNS resolvers. Now, why is that? If you're a little bit familiar with the DNS, you know that resolvers have a cache. So they take away much of the load for authoritative name servers, and they are the most important thing that a user sees of the DNS. If you're on your ISP or your campus network, you talk to a local DNS resolver most of the time, and that thing has to perform, because if it is offline, for you, the internet ceases to function. So anything that we can do to make sure that resolvers keep working is a choice that we have to make. So what does that practically mean for the choice of algorithms in DNSSEC? Well, if we look at signature size, any signature size that is similar to RSA 2048-bit, which is what we currently use the most still in DNSSEC, is fine. Anything that is RSA 4096 or smaller is probably okay. There are a couple of domains that use these large keys for signing. Anything larger is a problem. And essentially for public keys, it's more or less the same. Anything larger than a megabyte really becomes a huge problem, but actually anything larger than will fit in a single DNS datagram, which is 64 kilobytes, is a problem. I'll get back to that in a minute. If we look at signing speed for authoritative name servers, then anything up to the large RSA key sizes, so RSA is slower in signing than ECC. Anything up to the large RSA key sizes is probably okay. Anything where it takes more than 50 milliseconds to sign a single record is probably not okay. And the reason for this is that if you think about a very large top-level domain, such as .com, which has 160 million names in this, you need to generate a lot of signatures, and this would put a huge burden on the hardware that does that. Now, if we look at validation speed, there a comparison to ECDSA happens, right? Because for ECDSA, validation is much slower than for RSA. So here we say that anything that achieves the speed of ECDSA with the P384 curve is probably still okay. Anything more than that is an issue. And there are some other restrictions. Probably, if we can avoid it, we don't want stateful signing. That is the situation where you can use every key only once, so the hash-based signature schemes. If you really need specialized hardware for signing, that's something that we really would like to avoid. Okay, so one of our PhD candidates actually performed a study of the NIST round 3 entries for signature schemes. And these signature schemes are the ones that were evaluated this summer, and some of them were actually picked. If you then look at the criteria that we set, is that we wanted the signature size to be within a certain limit, and we conditionally accepted some things that were over a certain size. So a key size, we would like it to be less than 64 kilobytes, so it fits in a single DNS packet. But if it is bigger, but the signature size and the validation speed and the signing speed are still okay, we will conditionally accept this. If you then look at the round 3 algorithms that were in there, only 3 of them were somehow suitable for use in DNSSEC. And these 3 are highlighted in gray on the slide. So we have Falcon, Rainbow, and Red Gems. But as you can see, only Falcon actually has a public key size and a signature size that is somewhat acceptable. But what you can also see is that the public key is order of magnitude 900 bytes. The signature is about 700 bytes. If you add those 2 up, which you need to do if you want to transport a DNS key record, then you are already above the limit that we have for DNS packets. So even that is not an easy drop-in replacement. For rainbow and red gems, the signature size is actually great, but the public key size is so big that you can't even transport it in current DNS. So you will need to change the protocol. So if we think back to our green, orange, and red lines, then no single NIST round 3 entry is ideal. And if we consider signature size as a high priority, the two most suitable candidates are rainbow and red gems. Unfortunately, rainbow has been broken. So rainbow is no longer in the running because somebody proved that rainbow is actually not secure. So we're only left with red gems, which would require us to make changes to the DNS protocol because the public key does not fit into a DNS datagram. Even over TCP, the limit is 64 kilobytes because somebody in the 1980s decided that a 16-bit integer was large enough to describe the size of a DNS datagram, which made perfect sense at that time. Oh, and one little thing as well, we only considered what NIST calls level 1 security. So that's 128-bit security. If you have high value zones like the root of the DNS and you want to use a higher security level, all of the parameters of these algorithms go up, and that means the public keys become larger, the signatures become larger, and you essentially get to a situation where you cannot use any of these algorithms in current DNS. What about exogenes? And you might think, what are exogenes? Well, exogenes are one of the post-quantum algorithm approaches. And what is nice about them is that they have some interesting properties in terms of size. Exogenes are somehow related to elliptic curve cryptography. But I am not a cryptographer, nor am I a mathematician. Well, I'm a computer scientist, so I'm sort of a mathematician, but anyway, not this type of math. So you have to bear with me. I know how these things work in practice, but I can't explain the deeper mathematical details about these. Now, I navigated the literature on these algorithms because somebody told me, hey, these might be interesting because you have small keys and you have small signatures. Why don't you use this? Okay. The first problem I have is that I found no uniform metrics for key and signature sizes in the literature. More importantly, I found no uniform single core performance metrics, because when people talk about the performance of these algorithms, not just exogenes, but all of the other public post-quantum algorithms as well, sometimes they talk about wall clock time. So how long does it take to do a single verification or a single signature? But sometimes they talk about how many CPU cycles does this take, and then you have to wonder what CPU architecture are they using? How meaningful is it to talk about cycles? Another observation is that all of this feels very new, and this makes me wonder, is this sufficiently crypto-analyzed for use in real life? And if you think about Rainbow, which made it very far in the NIST competition, only to be kicked out last minute because somebody figured out it wasn't secure. What is the case for other algorithms? And these are just 4 specific signature algorithms that use these exogenes, and I'm going to look at one of them. So where are we headed? So to me, it feels like we're stumbling around in the dark a little bit, because I looked at this promising scheme with DNSSEC glasses on. And the particular one I looked at is called SkiSign, which looked attractive because the key and signature size at NIST level 1 look really great. Signature size 204 bytes. That's less than RSA 2048-bit, which has a 256-byte key. Public key 64 bytes, even better, because that's far smaller than an RSA 2048-bit key. Unfortunately, signing speed is a disaster. Creating a single signature takes 2 seconds. They recently improved it. So there's a recent publication where they improved the speed from 2.3 to 2 seconds. So that's not going to help us win the race. Validation speed. Validation is about 25 times slower than ECDSA P384. And if you remember the plot I showed you a couple of slides back, this essentially means that this gray plane, which shows you the number of signatures that I can compute in on a single core within a certain amount of time, essentially goes down to the origin of the plot and making it unusable in practice. Why did I add these asterisks? This may work for the DNS route. Why is that? Because we don't have that many records to sign in the DNS route. We don't sign the DNS route that often. And the resolvers also don't validate this very often. So there we might get away with these kinds of parameters. But if you think of a domain like .com, this is completely unusable. The question is, will this improve? So I already showed you that they did some work where the improvement wasn't spectacular. Validation became about 2 times as fast if you're a little bit generous. Another new development that I want to talk about is called Mayo. This is another example of a recently published PQC algorithm. This is actually very, very recent. Now, this algorithm has a very interesting property. It's actually designed by the person that broke Rainbow. So I point out Rainbow in the plot here. Because this algorithm allows you to trade off public key size for signature size. And essentially, if you have a larger public key, you have smaller signatures. This might actually be promising for DNSSEC. So I had conversations with people about this who are more of an expert in cryptography, and they asked, is this something that we might be able to use? Because what you could do is, if you want to optimize for small public key, you can accept a large signature size. You can also pick an okay-ish middle ground where both the signature and the public key are around 500 bytes, which means that in most cases you could cram this into the 1232 bytes that we have for DNS packets. Or you could say, well, in case I'm transporting public key records, I accept that I may have to fall back to TCP, but the signature size is then around the same size as RSA20 or 48 bits. So in most cases, I can safely transmit packets. Unfortunately, all of these algorithms are really, really new. And we don't know when we will have a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. So what is it that we can do about this? Well, we were wondering whether we need a fallback option. Because the introduction of new algorithms in DNSSEC takes a long time. I don't have time to go into this in detail, but one of my PhDs did a study of this, and a decade, so 10 years, is not exceptional for a change in DNSSEC. And a powerful quantum computer may appear in anywhere from 15 to 50 years or never. But the problem is, given how long it takes to introduce new algorithms, should we introduce a fallbacks option? And actually, we believe so, with an asterisk again, and I'll explain the asterisk in a minute. So this is a draft RFC that Andrew Fregley from VeriSign and I wrote together. Here we actually explicitly introduce a hash-based signature scheme as a fallback mechanism, because for hash-based signature schemes, we know they are provably secure. So what we expected and what we got was significant pushback from the IETF working group that deals with the DNS, because they see all sorts of operational challenges for hash-based signature schemes, and they're not wrong. The problem is that we really believe that we may need a fallback option, because none of the other algorithms that we might consider are currently mature enough to trust. So what are the takeaways from this? What are the takeaways for this for DNSSEC? The takeaways are that we have no hold on, excuse me. We have no simple drop-in replacements for existing algorithms. And that means there are lots of trade-offs that we need to consider, and this makes this a very complex process. So on top of the challenge of standardizing new algorithms, we may need to make changes to the protocol, which will take even longer. And another problem here is that understanding all of the moving parts requires a lot of domain knowledge, but it also requires knowledge about operational constraints. And this is a mistake that's often made, and you see this in the discussions in the IETF as well. You can make changes to a protocol, but if you don't take into account what this means for an operator, say, for example, the people that operate the DNS root zone or the people that operate something like .com, then your proposed change is never going to fly because these people can't put it into practice. And it may take years or even decades to come up with a way forward. And if you consider how crucial the DNS is, this is problematic. Okay, so I talked about one thing here, which is the DNS. But if we zoom out, the internet consists of many, many, many more protocols and applications. And then we haven't even considered context, because we may have the plain internet. We have IoT applications where you have other constraints, such as power constraints or constraints in CPU availability, industrial control systems, etc. And all of these need to transition to post-quantum cryptography if we want to stay secure in the future. So what is it that we are doing to work on that? So this is a little bit about the research that we're going to do in my group. So we're actually acquiring funding for a 5-year research project to study PQC deployment at internet scale. And I've given this the name SHARCS, so Systematic Holistic Approach for Re-engineering a Quantum Safe Internet. And this project really tries to answer the question, what if we have to transition the whole internet to post-quantum crypto tomorrow? This project will look at internet protocols and applications from 3 perspectives. We will look at situations where replacing algorithms by PQC is viable. So as you've already seen for the DNS, that's not the case. So in situations where the protocol is crucial, we may need to redesign it, or we may need to redesign the application in order to be able to transition to post-quantum cryptography. But there will also be situations where PQC is too costly and retirement of protocols or applications is maybe our only option, or sandboxing them somehow. With that, I'm at the end of my talk. I would like to leave this slide up. These are people I work with a lot, so I want to thank them for the really, really good discussions I have with them. And I think it's time to open the floor for questions. And I don't know if you left a message. I see that my camera failed, so I'm going to try and reactivate that for you.
That's wonderful. I will also switch here to my own camera. Okay. So we can still not see you as a feedback.
Okay. So let me see.
What you can also do is you can just reconnect if this is easy for you. It will not break anything.
I will try that. I'll do a reload.
And while Roland reconnects, don't hesitate to look at the Slido. We already have 30 questions in the Slido, and or even while we're answering questions, do not hesitate to add more questions to that. Okay, so can you hear us, Roland?
I can, and I hope you can now see me.
Perfect. Yeah, you're back. Wonderful. So yeah, thank you very much. It was a really great presentation. And besides the wonderful content and its selection, where we have many more questions in a second, I also really love your slide design with the very nice pictures on the one side and this nice green element on the left side. So it was really exactly the cozy that I enjoyed watching it. Okay, so we have about 30 questions, as I just said, and maybe there will be even some more questions during the answer, some of them. So the first question I would want to ask is, You were focusing now on DNS, and and at the same time there's more in the internet where you did
Yep.
not focus on. Do you have a scenario where you could describe a little bit more areas where something could go wrong? Do you have something?
Yes, certainly. So I picked DNS because it's one of the most constrained. Well, first of all, because I know a lot about DNS, but because it's one of the most constrained protocols. If we talk about the transition to PQC. But if you look at, for example, at TLS, where you have to do a key exchange, then if you want to do that at the scale at which a content delivery network does that, you have constraints in terms of CPU use, but also in terms of how much data you're willing to send both ways in an exchange. Because if you consider a TLS exchange right now, where you use, let's say, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and you use RSA for authentication, then the messages that you have to exchange are fairly small. And when I say fairly small, I say they fit within one TCP congestion window, which is great because it means you can do this in a single round trip. If you look at some of these PQC algorithms and some of the more attractive ones, because, for example, they perform well in terms of CPU power, they may require you to exchange much larger messages. And these messages might exceed the congestion window, in which case you'll have multiple round trips because you need to do all of the acts. And this kind of introduces additional delay. The same can be said, by the way, for DNS, where you might encounter this, right? Because DNS is extremely efficient. I send one UDP packet to a server, I get one UDP packet back, one round trip, I'm done, I have my answer. Now, let's say I have very large public keys, but they still fit within this 64 kilobytes. They will not fit in a TCP congestion window, so I need to do multiple round trips, instead of sending a single question and getting all of the answers at once. And this actually matters to users, because if you visit a modern web page, you are doing thousands of DNS lookups, you are setting up tens or maybe even hundreds of TLS connections to fetch all of the content that you are displaying. So any additional round trips that you add to that are going to slow down your browsing experience. And that's not even taking into account, let's say, applications in the IoT space, where the CPU power of the devices is fairly limited. But because we've been using RSA and elliptic curve crypto for many, many years, they actually have CPUs that are capable of executing some of these algorithms fairly efficiently because they're built into the CPU architecture. That is all going to go out of the window as soon as we switch to PQC algorithms that have completely different basic building blocks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very, very interesting. And so it's really affecting a wide range of applications and things. And your research project is really timely, and congratulations to it. And I hope it will be funded if it's not decided yet, because I think it's very important.
Fingers crossed.
Cross the fingers. Okay, cool. So then let's switch to Erkin. Loic, if you want to enable your camera, you're more than welcome to do so as well, of course, because you're still blacked. And maybe Erkin, you can go with the first audience question, and I will jump in whenever I feel like doing it.
Okay, so thanks again, Roland, for the talk. I will go ahead and pick some questions from the audience. So first question was, where will quantum computers emerge first, and will they replace our desktops? Will they replace mainframes?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a question I like. So caveat, I'm not a physicist, so I only know superficially how difficult it is to develop these things. But where will these emerge first? With people that have the deepest pockets. And I'm guessing that this NSA that I mentioned earlier in the slides, or maybe in France, the Deuxième Bureau, are going to be the people that have access to these first. Because breaking into encrypted communication is, of course, the holy grail for intelligence agencies. So it makes a lot of sense for them to invest in this. and these people aren't stupid. If you look at commercially available quantum computers right now, you can actually purchase something that people call a quantum computer, but this is not the type of quantum computer that I'm talking about in the context of cryptography. These are more specialized, and these are used, for example, in the realm of simulations of things like protein folding. So for the life sciences. And they're still very expensive devices. Whether or not a quantum computer is ever going to be the size of your iPhone, I don't know. The problem is that all of the current technologies require super cooled systems. I didn't include a picture of so Google has a beautiful picture from this Nature article of their quantum computer, and it's this huge device that, and most of all of the plumbing that is in there does one thing, and that is cool the thing, because they need superconduction in order to run it. So whether you're ever going to have a room temperature superconductor in your pocket, who knows? But not anytime soon. Probably not in my lifetime.
Okay, so this speaks kind of to another question, which is about the energy consumption of a quantum computer. And the person asks, is there a drastic increase from the traditional computing for the same tasks?
Yeah, so that's actually a double-edged sword, right? So is there does it use much more energy? Yes, it does, right? But it's actually an interesting question whether it uses more energy to perform the same task. You can probably argue that for some tasks, it uses less energy because it can execute those tasks much more efficiently than current supercomputers can. I'm certainly not an expert on this, so it's kind of hard for me to speculate there, but I'm fairly sure that there will be applications where a quantum computer is much more energy efficient, despite the fact that you need a huge building full of cooling equipment to even get the thing to work. Because if you wanted to execute the same task with a regular supercomputer, you might need a supercomputer of a size that we currently don't have. Or it might not even be tractable, right? You might be able to solve new problems that you can't ever imagine to solve with the computers that we have nowadays. So I think that's an open question. If I speculate a little bit, it really depends on the application.
Okay. Maybe related to that, do you think can you think of new side channel attacks and so on for quantum computers? Do you think that will play a role when we talk about energy consumption and things like that? So it's rather a question if you read something about it, because I didn't so far, and maybe you stumbled upon something.
No, I haven't. I would be surprised if there aren't such attack possibilities, right? Especially now when you so maybe it's good to give a little bit of context there. I talk about post-quantum cryptography, which is cryptography that you execute on a regular computer in order to protect yourself against the existence of a quantum computer. But there are also people doing research on actual quantum cryptography. So actually using the properties of quantum mechanics or a quantum computer to protect traffic. Obviously, if you introduce such things, people are going to try and attack those. And all of the focus right now is on building this quantum computer and not on building a secure quantum computer. So I'm not an expert here, but if history teaches us any lesson, is that any computer system has side channels. So I would not be surprised if that's not also the case for a quantum computer.
Mm-hmm. And maybe related to that, one of the questions in the audience is also, why do we have quantum computers now? So what was happening that 5 years ago quantum computers were slowly emerging and suddenly it's there, but 7 years ago nobody was talking about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually the research was already going on, right? There were a lot of people who were considering the theory. And then momentum came to start and try to build them. So if you look at who are trying to build quantum computers, Google is trying this, IBM, Microsoft. So all of the large tech companies are investing in this, and they're investing in this because of the potential of executing certain tasks much more efficiently. It's always been a theoretical possibility, and I can't really answer why they suddenly started doing it, because I don't think that in the last 7 years the state of the art in terms of physics changed that much that they wouldn't have been possible maybe 5 or 10 years earlier. But the fact that we're now doing all of this research also means that technology really progresses, right? Because we went from a situation where somebody proved that a qubit, so the base unit for a quantum computer, could be built, to a situation where we're now building systems of multiple qubits that actually reliably operate for a certain amount of time.
And what made you interested in quantum computing? So how did you come up with regarding this as a problem now? Because you're doing internet measurements for quite a while, super successfully, DNS security and so on. So this is your business. What was the trigger of saying, now I go into quantum? Did you observe something in the traffic? Did you read an article?
So the trigger, that's a good question. So the trigger for me was twofold. So the trigger for me was indeed reading that this was coming up and that this was going to pose new challenges. Also the fact that colleagues at another university here in the Netherlands are fairly active in the development of post-quantum algorithms. So I talk to these people and I tell, oh, we're working on this cool thing and we need it because all of the algorithms that we have are going to go out the window. And I was like, what? That's a problem for the internet. And that made it interesting for me, right? So the driver for me was to see that the cryptographic community, which had suddenly shifted, and this was quite a sudden change, to investing time, money in developing new algorithms. And this is not something cryptographers take lightly, right? Because they all know that anything new is suspicious, because anything new probably has errors in it that they haven't thought of, right? They're smart enough to realize that they might be constructively building an algorithm and then somebody else proves, well, if you do that, it's broken, right? These people only invest their time in this if it matters. And for me, that was a driver to say, okay, this is going to have an impact on the internet. And especially if you look at the NIST competition, the fact that NIST started this competition means that at some point there are going to be standards for post-quantum algorithms, and those standards are going to end up in government tender documents. So a government that wants to purchase equipment is going to say, this equipment must support these algorithms. To me, that means that it's no longer a question of if people are going to deploy this type of cryptography, it's a matter of when they are going to do that. And that is going to have a huge impact on the internet. That makes it interesting for me as an internet researcher.
And will you be able to measure the threat when looking at the things that you measure? So will you be able to say, this is also a good question for Oliver Hohlfeld, who also does lots of measurement things on the internet. But I know that you're also doing a lot of stuff and expertise there. So will there be, or do you expect there will be something characteristic where you can see, okay, now somebody has a quantum computer, measuring if the transition to the post-quantum algorithms happened will probably be fairly simple in the sense that you can look at, okay, which key exchanges are used, and therefore you can say percentage of the internet that transitioned is now X%. But the other one is maybe the more interesting question. Do you expect there will be something appearing, or will it be more silent and it will not be appearing in the traffic?
So this is a little bit speculative, of course, but my speculation is that the security services are going to likely, or ministries of defense or those types of organizations are going to be the first organizations to have access to this type of technology, right? They're fairly good at keeping this thing under wraps. So if we don't have another Edward Snowden telling us that they have a quantum computer and they broke everybody's crypto, we might not actually know. But we can speculate, right? Because if commercial systems like are currently people are in the very initial stages of trying to develop, if those become a viable product, let's say I can buy a 20 qubit quantum computer at a reasonable price from a commercial company and they will support it. That's when you have to start getting worried, right? Because if they can do that, that means they have overcome a lot of challenges in physics that suddenly turns this currently intractable problem into something that is just scaling up. So it's a little bit speculative. I would look at what happens on the market and not what happens on the internet.
Mhm.
I don't think you actually see this on the internet. And you're right. What we will see, of course, is how people deploy post-quantum algorithms. The problem is, though, that before they can start doing this, we actually already need to do a lot of research to assess the impact. And I sketched just one situation where we talk about DNSSEC, right? But if we look at a wider, there are so many moving parts just in that if you look at the wider internet, this is going to be a huge challenge. And it's not going to happen overnight. The content delivery networks are making the first move here by deploying key exchange algorithms that are PQ algorithms. I know that Mozilla is implementing support for these algorithms in the nightly for Firefox, and due out anytime soon, I think, actually. So there we're going to see the first use of this in practice, but this is still very experimental. Yeah, I think it's going to take another few years before we see this being used at a large scale, and then probably only in the web or only in TLS where it matters now, right? Because since we don't know when this quantum computer will exist, we don't know when somebody will be able to decrypt this traffic that we exchange right now.
Yeah, and there was a lot of questions in that direction, but I hand over to our two moderators, to Loïc and Erkin, for continuing.
Yeah, your answer it kind of makes me wonder, because there was one question that I was also kind of wondering about. It's related to this. How hard do you think will it be to transition to PQC globally? Is this another BGP-SEC situation? And yeah, also, yeah, related to this, I was wondering personally, with Shor's algorithm, can you parallelize that, or is it just like adding some more power on top of the random search, or is there some kind of parallel
it's a good
element to this?
Yeah, it's a nice question. So I'll answer the two. I'll answer the short question first because it's easy to answer.
Yeah.
Actually, there are people doing research on improving Shor's algorithm, and they've succeeded. So there is a parallel line of research, even though these people don't have a quantum computer. Right? Think about it. This is really cool. They've never seen a quantum computer, but they can still think of improvements to this algorithm that actually reduces the number of qubits that you need in order to crack RSA or ECC, and it reduces the time for cracking. So actually, the slide I showed you is no longer reality. Reality is that a quantum computer could do this faster than I showed on the slide. So that's the short question. The other, quickly remind me, the other question was?
How hard do you think it will be to transition to PQC globally?
So the short answer is very hard. It's an 80-20 kind of thing. You'll probably be able to transition 80% of the meaningful internet traffic fairly quickly. It will still take years, but it will be fairly doable. And then we're talking about things like HTTPS connections, TLS connections, the DNS. But there will also be a part that is a lot harder, and this is, I expect a lot of problems in the IoT space, simply because of the power consumption, CPU availability, etc., or memory, where we may have to make radically different choices in how we secure these systems. Right, that's also a possible direction we can go. And we can also say, we're no longer going to use public key crypto there because it's simply not viable anymore. But that is a major redesign, right? So that is very, very hard. And making that choice is very hard, right? Because if you built an entire ecosystem on a certain premise, the fact that you have public key cryptography and that it is affordable in terms of CPU, memory, and energy consumption, if you have to throw that out the window and start over, that's not trivial. The other thing, of course, and this is there's always this nice example, is the installed base of legacy devices that still are used and still do certain things that you're going to have to accept will be on the internet forever and are never going to die, and you probably can't fix them, right? There's this wonderful paper by a guy called Dave Plonka who wrote about NTP server migration. So there was he used to work for a university that ran an NTP server. That NTP server was discontinued, but the IP address for that was hard coded in certain CPE devices. So people that like the end user routers that people use at home. 15 years after that NTP server got discontinued, they still received traffic on that IP address of people trying to synchronize their clocks. Right, so we have to accept that a certain part of the internet is never going to transition. The worry I have is that this may be bigger than we would hope. There may be too many systems out there that are crucial that we cannot fix, that have long life cycles, where equipment is, if you think of equipment that is used in industrial environments, right, industrial PCs, they have lifetimes that far exceed any sort of mainstream IT equipment that we use, simply because of the fact that it has to do one job, it has to do it well, it has to work in very harsh environments, in a industrial plant, a chemical plant, or whatever, and we can't easily replace these things. And these are the things that I worry about, which is why I think this transition is going to be hard and it's going to take so long.
Yeah, okay, thanks for your answer. It also makes me wonder about like the end users, because wouldn't you need to buy actually a quantum PC to be able to use quantum cryptography? So
you need for post-quantum computer, post-quantum, your iPhone can do that, right? So
okay.
But quantum, so the algorithms we're designing now are for use on mainstream computers. Right, they just protect against the threat that quantum computers pose. Obviously, for the newer, like the really researchy stuff, so the quantum crypto algorithms themselves, so not post-quantum but quantum, yeah, there you need a quantum computer. But
okay. Yeah,
whether that will ever be for normal users, I'm not going to say something stupid and say no, that will never happen, because that will come back to haunt me. But
yeah, okay, thanks. Maybe I can leave the hands to the other moderator.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I can take over. So also from my side, thank you very much, Professor Rijswijk-Deij, if I pronounce correctly, for the very interesting talk. And yeah, I would like to start with my question, actually taking advantage of being a moderator. I want to ask, what are the building blocks of quantum computers? I mean, like, how do they look like?
Yeah, so the
silicon-based material, I guess, but yeah.
The building blocks are so the physical qubits are sort of like, I'm not a physicist, right? But they're superconducting circuits, and then you combine, and because these circuits are very noisy, right? So they have a lot of errors on them. Which means you need to do a lot of error correction, and typically you combine a whole host of physical qubits to form one logical qubit, right? So all of these physical qubits together act as a single qubit from the perspective of it being a processor, and a whole lot of the electronics that go into this, all it is doing is error correction, so to make sure that the circuit behaves as it should. If you then combine multiple of these in a single computer, the problem becomes exponentially more problematic, because now you have to coordinate error correction between all of these things. So a lot of the research actually goes into error correction and making sure that these circuits behave reliably. That's sort of where my knowledge of the physics stops.
Okay. I mean, yeah, maybe it's also out of your scope, but any idea what are the qubits made of? Like, what matter is used there? Or is when we say qubit, it's just a logical abstraction we use for representation?
Well, they're just electronic circuits, but they use superconductors. So, which is why
okay.
which is why they're super cooled. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, yeah, this is also something I'm really interested. So how open is quantum computing research, or how accessible is quantum computing research? I mean, these companies are doing some research behind the doors. How open are they? Also, of course, there is a university done at research done at the university that, of course, published to the public, but also the company's role here, how accessible and open this knowledge?
That's a good question. So, like you observed, there's a lot of research taking place at universities. So here in the Netherlands, for example, there all of the technical universities do research into quantum computing. They typically collaborate with industry partners. That research is open because it's publicly funded. Whatever. Look, if the networking side of things is any guide for this, if you look at companies like Google or Microsoft, or probably IBM for that matter, then what they publish is typically a little bit removed from what they can actually do. So what they can actually do is probably a little bit more than what they publish. But they are generally publishing these things, right? So the paper I showed you, the quantum supremacy paper, describes essentially the system that Google built here. How accessible is this in terms of one person being able to comprehend what happens there is another matter, right? These are huge teams. There's a reason there are so many authors on that paper. And even though somebody might conceptually understand how such a system works, doesn't mean they understand the details of all of the moving parts, right? The error correction, how do you design the circuit? How do you cool the circuit? How do you interconnect the circuits? All of that are areas of expertise of their own. So the research budgets for this are huge because you need so many specialized people in order to work together to build such a thing.
Okay, thank you. Also, towards the end of our these talks, we also try to cover some non-technical questions. So we have a wide spectrum of audience from senior researchers, but as well as PhD students, master students, even bachelor students. So I would like to ask you about, not specifically to quantum computing, but in general, do you think what is key for a successful research? Or how do you research?
So you have to have this spark of curiosity, right? So especially, so I work for a technical university, right? So one of my drivers for research is how does it work and how can we make it better? And it really helps if whatever you're researching is related to a problem that you experience, or you know somebody who has that problem, right? So if you tie it to something concrete, for me, that's something that works. But this is, of course, highly individual. Let's say, if you look at the internet, so I've been working on the internet for a very long time, since I was a simple master student in the 1990s. And it's always fascinated me that you can communicate with people, and understanding how that works on a large scale drives my research, right? It keeps fascinating me. And if you don't have that intrinsic drive to understand things, you will struggle to be successful, I think, because then what makes you get up in the morning, right? In terms of research, for me, that's really learning something new. what I really enjoy personally, like in my position now as a more senior position, is working with talented PhDs or master students who themselves have this curiosity, right? This is what gets you very far. At the same time, to be successful, you also need to be working on a problem that other people care about, right? I can be curious about how something works, but if nobody cares about that, it's just my curiosity. Which is why, if I look at my own research, and especially right this topic of post-quantum, that's going to be relevant for the world, right? Because we rely on the internet to be secure. Our entire society depends on securely communicating over the internet, because we can't pay for things. We can't make doctor's appointments. We can't interact with government. If all of that goes out the window, our trust fabric that we have on the internet breaks down. That makes it not only driven by my own curiosity, but this is something that impacts society. So to be successful as a researcher, I think you have to combine your own curiosity, problem that matters for the world. Does that answer your question?
I think you're muted.
Oh, he's gone all quiet. Oh dear.
Okay, so do you hear me?
Now it works, yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean this is a very good answer, and it's sort of a little bit repetitive because I hear this a lot from Professor Paul as well. I mean, I'm purely driven by my curiosity, and Professor Paul always directs me, yeah, curiosity is really good, like motivates you, but also think of the impact, like what problem you will solve apart from your curiosity. So yeah, this, I mean, I feel like, okay,
well,
the same words from different mouth, okay.
Yeah, especially in technology, right? If you just want your curiosity, maybe philosophy is a better topic.
Yeah.
Maybe related to that question, because teaching is also always a very important dimension. What do we have to introduce in the curriculum? What would I need if I would want to do now research in quantum computing, post-quantum computing, if I'm a computer scientist? So I will not go into the physics probably, but which skill set would you say is needed? You said already a little bit math would be nice. Is there maybe something already in your curriculum? Do you teach quantum computing already at Twente?
No, so quantum, no, I mean, we have a physics department that teaches quantum mechanics. So actually understanding something about quantum mechanics helps, right? Because the basis of quantum computing is this quantum mechanical notion that something can be in two states at the same, or in anywhere between two states at the same time, right? And then you have this observer effect that if you observe it, its state collapses, etc. That's actually the basis for quantum computing. So understanding that some of that at a conceptual level will help. But there's also a lot of mathematics involved. I know that there are courses on how would I program a quantum computer. I mean, this always blows my mind, right? We already know how we're going to use this thing without ever having built it, which is, if you take a step back and think about it, is essentially as awesome as people like Ada Lovelace or Alan Turing thinking, if we had a computer, we could do this and this and this, right? So it's on par with sort of the founding people of our discipline. In order to understand something like post-quantum crypto, I think that will be worked into cryptography courses anyway, because that's already happening, right? Essentially, we're replacing one class of very hard mathematical problems that we base our crypto on by another class of very hard mathematical problems that we base our crypto on.
Yeah. And related to what you were talking about, the DNS, but also other mechanisms where we have to switch from cryptography algorithms using different methodologies because we want to go post-quantum. What would you say regarding the risk analysis if only part of the internet transitioned? / how can we incentivize the people to transition? / who pays for it?
Yeah, excellent question. So maybe I should ask you to review my research proposal, because these are actually questions that are in the research proposal, right? So in terms of incentives, there might be misaligned incentives, right? So it might be that the organizations that bear the cost of doing the transition don't immediately reap the benefits, in which case you need some sort of incentive policy, either from, and actually governments can play a role in this, right? If they write in tenders for where they procure services that you must support this is actually a driver for deployment of things. This has been a driver for deployment of a technology like DNSSEC, or of for example, securing email, right? So this is driven by demand rather than people implementing this because they think they can make more money if they do it. So that might need to happen, and we definitely need to research where are the incentives, who bears the costs, right? And this is a very complex question. Again, just thinking about DNS, right? If we need to make changes to the protocol, this is going to have an impact on operators. And if you think of the people that operate the root zone or the big TLD zones, they process so much traffic that any change where, let's say, they require twice the amount of CPU power is an enormous investment for them. They need to buy so much new hardware. They need to buy so much new traffic capacity, right? DNS is this thing that doesn't need a lot of bandwidth. What if we start using a public key algorithm that has a key size that is 2 orders of magnitude larger than that we have now? It's going to have a huge impact. So yeah, this is something that I think we don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know what we need to change, which is why we need to do the research.
Very good, very good. So time is already up. Thank you very much, Loic. Thank you very much, Hagen. You did a wonderful job in managing the vast amount of questions and selecting really the good one. And really big thank you to you, Roland, because not only because it was a really great presentation, but also because it was it's like a really future topic, so it's not so certain what exactly will be in, but I think you managed really to have the span between being concrete and at the same time being open enough to show like, okay, these are directions of thought, and we really have to tackle it right now. And I think this was exactly the perfect message. So thank you very much. Big applause from us. I'm replacing the audience here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. So
great. So the next,
and I have something at the end. I have a title from Christian for you.
Oh, very good. So because this is exactly the next thing, so I will say his name and then you can say the title, because the next edition will be on the 7th of December, and it will be a close colleague of Roland. It will be Christian Hasselman, who is the director of Sidon Labs, also in the Netherlands, in close proximity to Roland. And so far, we don't know the title, so it's now a world premiere. So Roland can tell us what we're talking about.
Drum roll. With apologies from Christian for not sending this in earlier, the title is Increasing Internet Security by Bridging Research and Operations. So I think that that is very nice, because SIDN is the operator of the .nl CCTLD. So Christian, of course, has lots of colleagues that deal with day-to-day operations. So I think this will be very interesting.
Oh, very good. And we couldn't have had a better announcement than you for that. So thank you very much for that. So now you will see the outro. So don't forget to subscribe on the website for the updates for the upcoming editions. Maybe in one of the upcoming editions, we might again have Roland, because he has lots of many more interesting subjects. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the LinkedIn, subscribe to the Facebook, tell your friends about the event, share the video, because it's very important to spread the information about cybersecurity, and quantum computing is definitely something that you have to consider now, because as Roland so perfectly stated it, the moment the quantum computer arrives, we are not only lost in the moment, but even for the data that was stored before. And therefore, the earlier we do such transitions, the more secure we are. So thanks a lot. Have a great day, and see you all on the 7th of December. Goodbye.
cher CyberCN Pôle d'excellence Région Bretagne. Au revoir et à la prochaine.